Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, where we examine the consequences of Boris Johnson's Freedom Day this Monday, when many remaining COVID restrictions were lifted. Although this just applies to England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and then Wales are following Westminster in their relaxation of many of their social restrictions designed to prevent spread of the virus. This summer, much of the UK has been acting as if the pandemic was over, with a wave of major sporting events. At first, these were trial events, carefully managed with limited crowds. But in quick succession, England has staged the European Football Tournament, Wimbledon, the Open Golf and the British Grand Prix with virtual full houses. Unfortunately, these mass gatherings have coincided with a resurgent virus, with highly infectious variants leading towards record infection rates. Public confidence in the government's message of removing controls has been shaken by the revelation last weekend that the vaccine-protected Health Secretary Sajid Javid was himself infected, while Prime Minister Johnson was reported to have cancelled a victory over the virus address on Monday, with mounting government concern over the surge in new COVID cases. Freedom Monday was instead marked by revelries in nightclubs and riverboats, and further claims from estranged Prime Ministerial Advisor Dominic Cummings that Johnson had opposed previous controls because only the over 80s were dying. In addition, the Prime Minister and Chancellor should have been pinged by their own apps to self-isolate as close contacts of the Health Secretary. However, further controversy followed when instead they said they could take advantage of a pilot daily testing scheme for essential workers. A rapid U-turn followed in face of the wrath of the estimated 500,000 people who were self-isolating at present. On today's show, we turn to New Zealand's top epidemiologist and public health professor, Michael Baker, for an international view. How does a country which has successfully pursued a COVID elimination strategy regard the approach of the UK government? Then, Dr Bharat Pankhania of Exeter University expresses the fears of many UK experts about the risks and dangers of the UK government policy. Now, New Zealand is one of the success stories of the pandemic. Around the same size as Scotland, it's had 2,800 confirmed cases of COVID and 26 fatalities. Scotland, whose infection rate is similar to the other countries of the UK, has had more than 325,000 cases and over 10,000 deaths. Professor Michael Baker is one of the key architects of the New Zealand elimination strategy.
Professor Michael Baker, you're speaking from Wellington, New Zealand, a country which has pursued a successful elimination strategy, at least up until now. You've had 2,400 cases of COVID and 26 deaths. From that vantage point, how do you regard Boris Johnson's Freedom Day?
Well, it seems irresponsible and potentially quite dangerous, this policy response to the COVID pandemic, particularly the more infectious Delta variant. And it doesn't seem that you have the conditions for opening up in the UK at present.
But shouldn't we have faith in the vaccine? I mean, the UK has one of the highest vaccinated percentages of the population in the entire world. Shouldn't we just put our faith in the vaccine to believe that that will be enough to suppress the virus?
Well, the vaccines are very effective at preventing death and serious disease. They're not quite so effective at preventing transmission. The trouble is you only have, I think, about 55% of the population fully vaccinated at this point, and that's clearly not enough. So the thing that really amazes us is why the UK is not waiting until it's got wide or high coverage with this vaccine. In particular, you could vaccinate down to 12-year-olds, possibly even to younger age groups in the future. And that's the approach being taken across Europe and North America. And it's certainly the approach in New Zealand. I mean, we're rolling out vaccine now, and we've got approval to vaccinate down to 12 years of age. And we wouldn't think of relaxing our guard until we had very high coverage down to those younger age groups.
Professor Baker, I was looking at the Foreign Office guidance for UK visitors to New Zealand, and they warn people to beware of changing climatic conditions and also the possibility of terrorism. What would be your warning to Kiwi visitors to the United Kingdom at the present?
Well, I think they'd have to be fully vaccinated because otherwise there's a high chance they're going to get this infection.
Will New Zealand ban UK visitors under current circumstances, in your opinion?
Well, we have a system that tries to be quite even-handed. We do obviously allow people to come in via quarantine. We have quarantine-free travel from Australia and the Cook Islands. Occasionally that is limited from different parts of Australia if they've got outbreaks, but it's been going for several months and is working well in general. But for other countries, we look at the proportion of people, the risk that they will be infected when they arrive here. And at the moment, we've basically turned down the tap. In other words, reduced the numbers of people allowed to travel from countries that have out-of-control pandemics. And that has been India and Pakistan and Papua New Guinea and parts of South America. The UK was in that position before Christmas, but it's since then it appeared to bring the pandemic under control. But now I think it's going obviously in the opposite direction. So if we find that a significant number of travellers from the UK are testing positive when they arrive here, we would restrict the numbers quite rapidly.
Professor Baker, what would you say to those who say, OK, New Zealand's been a huge success story, we'll give you that, but there you are, thousands of miles from virtually nowhere in the Antipodes, an island nation of only just over 5 million people. It's possible for you to commit to an elimination strategy, quite different from a major country like the UK and one of the great entrepôts and hubs of world travel. A totally different situation.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think New Zealand has some natural advantages, and so does Australia. But if you look at a country the size of China, mainland China, that has adopted an elimination strategy early on, and it's protecting 1.4 billion people. They do have outbreaks, which they do stamp out. And also you look at Vietnam, which is actually struggling now, but for a year, it largely maintained an elimination strategy and protected over 100 million people with long, complex land borders with China and other countries. And that is just by pursuing all the strategies you need for elimination to work.
Obviously, New Zealand, historically, and in terms of ancestry, has many connections with Scotland. They're the blood of our blood and the bone of our bone. Scotland has had 10,000 deaths from COVID compared to New Zealand's 26, with similar populations. Would it have been possible, in your estimation, for Scotland to pursue an elimination strategy?
Yeah, definitely. And I've talked with colleagues there throughout the pandemic who I think desperately wanted to pursue this strategy. I think there was support from the Scottish government, but the difficulty was that you are obviously part of the United Kingdom, and to an extent, you had quite a large extent, you could not control your borders, and that is an essential requirement to pursue elimination. So I think Scotland actually got to a point of having very low numbers, and actually it was looking at elimination as potentially a strategy. But I think in the end, it was difficult in that context of where you're located.
Looking at the vaccines, what's your estimation of the efficacy of the variety now of vaccines which are available, and which ones are New Zealand choosing?
Yes, well, I think the vaccines generally available in high-income countries are all highly effective at preventing death and serious illness, and somewhat less effective at stopping infection. But say in the New Zealand case, we have enough Pfizer vaccine to vaccinate the whole country by the end of the year, and that we've gone with just one vaccine for simplicity. But we have also supplies of AstraZeneca and other vaccines that have been committed. But at this stage, I think from an equity point of view, we can see benefits in us being not at the front of the queue, which is, we've been further back in the queue, because there are other countries that desperately need these vaccines. It's actually life or death in much of the world to get vaccine supplied and administered. But of course, we are now very keen to achieve full coverage, and we're on track to do that by the end of the year.
Professor Baker, once again, as a scientist, an epidemiologist, what's your personal reaction when you see the scenes, which no doubt you have, of people celebrating in nightclubs and riverboats down the Thames with people with social distancing of probably 2 inches as opposed to 2 metres? Do you have a personal reaction to that, these sort of extraordinary scenes of this week in London?
Well, what I should say is that is life in New Zealand at the moment, and that's been life in New Zealand for most of the duration of the pandemic. So when I look at the UK, I say that scene looks very familiar to me, but then I realise that it's in the context of the virus still circulating at very high rates, in fact, the highest rates on Earth now, and the context of a population that is not fully vaccinated. So that is what I find unbelievable, that policy has been taken. It seems reckless and I would say quite dangerous.
Would you have any advice for a UK citizen, apart from visiting New Zealand as quickly as possible? What can people do in this environment to stay safe in a personal and family level?
What is remarkable to me is that the UK is not vaccinating children. So in a sense, it's saying, we think it is okay to have 5 to 10 million children and young people across the UK infected over the next 6 months, because that's what's going to happen with these rates of infection. It'll be very hard to avoid being exposed to the virus, given at the moment you're doing something like 1 million tests a day and 5% of them are found to be positive. That means the country's awash with Delta, the Delta variant of this virus. So it is, I think almost everyone's going to be exposed unless they seal themselves off somehow from contact with other people. Unfortunately, some of the people who will get sick will be fully vaccinated because of just they're exposed, and no vaccine is 100% effective. So there will be people getting sick and dying as a result of this. The other concern I should say, and this is one of the reasons why scientists around the globe got concerned about this policy, is that this creates a huge opportunity for vaccine escape variants. So that's variants that are somewhat or quite resistant to the vaccine will thrive and they'll make more copies of themselves. And that means there'll be this amazing evolutionary pressure or selective pressure favouring vaccine escape variants. And I think this environment of having a population that's about half vaccinated and has very high rates of circulating virus, that is a perfect environment for these new variants to emerge.
Finally, Professor Baker, you're part of a world community of scientists, physicians in contact with each other. How does the world community of scientists studying this deadly virus, how do you keep in touch with each other in terms of coming up with new solutions?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. It's a mixture of established contacts, informal networks, and increasingly we have formed a network called the World Health Network, in fact, that is trying to bring together a community of scientists and also, I would say, people who are quite activists, because there's this incredible frustration with governments, some governments around the world, that have appeared not to prioritise protecting the public as they could have. And I can sense that frustration and actual anger from colleagues in the UK because the pandemic has been so badly managed there. It's almost a list of what not to do. And so I think that has, it's something we don't feel in a lot of countries because our governments are doing their best. But I get that palpable sense of frustration and anger from my colleagues in the UK because of how badly managed the pandemic response has been there.
Professor Michael Baker from Wellington, New Zealand, thank you once again for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, Alex continues his review of the consequences of Freedom Day with Dr Bharat Pankhania. Join us then. Welcome back. Alex is discussing the consequences of Boris Johnson's COVID Freedom Day strategy. One of its most trenchant domestic critics is Dr Bharat Pankhania of Exeter University.
Dr Bharat Pankhania, you've been a trenchant critic of Boris Johnson's Freedom Day. What are your key concerns?
The key concerns are that we've got the ingredients of a perfect storm. On the one hand, we've got a rising number of cases in the under-immunized or unimmunized population, albeit younger population. And then we have removed all restrictions, and restrictions in serious sensitive places like nightclubs as well. And then to go along with that, we've removed the mandatory infection control measures like wearing of masks in crowded places, tubes, trains, buses, etc. So we have the perfect storm of no restrictions, no infection control measures, rising number of cases, and we don't have the authority to now impose as much infection control measures.
Can you think of any precedent of a country loosening restrictions into the teeth of a pandemic?
No, it doesn't. And I, as an infectious disease doctor, look at this and say, I wouldn't be doing this. I would at least have my foot on the brake pedal. I'm not here in the business of continuous forever ad infinitum restrictions. What we want is slowly, carefully, item by item, reduce the restrictions and have your foot on the brake pedal just in case. So Israel had to do a U-turn, as did Holland, as did Chile. So there is precedent that you just don't let go. You should have your foot on the brake pedal.
As a public health expert, what was your own personal feelings when we saw the footage of London nightclubs, of young people bopping the night away, celebrating Freedom Day at the stroke of midnight? What was your personal reaction when you saw these scenes?
Multiple fold. One is obviously we have failed to educate, inform and advise people about the dangers of getting infected. People seem to be unaware that if you get infected, the number of things can happen. 1, severe illness. 2, you get better and all is well. 3, you could go on to have long COVID. So, and long COVID is an unknown. We don't know how long it lasts, what damage it does. So when we saw all the people get together on the stroke of midnight to celebrate in an indoor place where alcohol is served and lots of people, maybe poor ventilation, it gives me a lot of cause for concern that we've let go of managing this outbreak.
Looking at the evidence from across the planet at the present moment, can you give us an indication just how infectious, for example, the Delta variant is?
So if we were to make comparisons, and you make comparisons by looking at what we call the basic or the effective reproduction number, we would have heard of it as referred to as R0. So if we look at that, the Delta variant is about 3 to 4 times more infectious than the original wild Wuhan SARS-CoV-2 virus. So it is significantly more infectious. I have to say, whilst it is significantly more infectious, we are very thankful that it is not significantly more disease-causing. And the other good news is that it is not significantly vaccine bypassing.
How did we get to a situation? I mean, I personally, I was at the England-Scotland game in the Euro Championships a few weeks ago, and there were 12,000 people at Wembley. The whole thing was rigorously enforced with pre-testing and social distancing. There were stewards all over the place telling disappointed England fans to get their masks back on and things like that. How can we have gone from that situation to just a few weeks later, a semi-final and a final with 60,000 people packing Wembley Stadium? Did you get any appreciation of this acceleration out of controlled sporting events to apparently uncontrolled events packed with tens of thousands of people?
What has happened is I feel you've given up on wanting to control this, because anyone, any basic expert in infectious disease control would tell you that if you do this in a short time with the virus still present and circulating in the community, you're basically giving up on all your infection control measures.
But we can watch on our television screens virtually every day some of the key experts in the country with the Prime Minister, backing up I mean, what are these people thinking about? I mean, is there discussion in the scientific community about the messages that are going out at the present moment?
There's a lot of discussion, and if we will get the opportunity to look at exactly what government's own advisors were saying, it will come out in the wash, because it is blindingly obvious that if you got a lot of cases, you need to go cautious. But these are political decisions, I feel. It cannot be led by science, because the science is telling us you need to go careful, you need to go cautious, and the science would tell us nothing wrong whatsoever in mandating wearing of masks in public places, because that reduces case numbers and allows us a small modicum of control.
What are the young people as part of your classes? I mean, what are they thinking about the pandemic? I mean, on the one hand, they're of an age group which is now very much many of their contemporaries putting themselves at risk. On the other hand, they're in your classes, so they know a thing or two about pandemics. What are they saying to you about what's going on at the present moment?
So I'm really privileged, because I keep in touch with my students, and there is a cohort of students who communicate with me on a personal basis, and they write to me. They send me a WhatsApp message, and we communicate instantly. What I would say to you personally is look after yourselves, don't get infected, don't infect others, wear a better quality mask. And I upped my advice from the ordinary surgical masks that we've been wearing. I said, I think we should up it to an FFP2, because we have got a more infectious variant here. And I have to say, I'm sorry, I thought science would lead the management of the outbreak, but it looks like the politics actually has the trump card.
Dr Pankhania, if the government had waited, instead of over 50%, perhaps two-thirds of a first vaccination jag, until perhaps 90% of the population were in that position, would they have been able to do then, in relative safety, what they're doing now in this high summer?
The elephant in the room that we are not discussing and addressing properly is why, on what basis, are we saying we do not wish to immunize children aged 12 and above, considering the MHRA gave the vaccines a clean bill of health? I appreciate that there may be a small percentage who may have carditis as a result of having the injection. But then on the balance of risks and benefits, I would say immunizing the children and that cohort would pay us many, many other additional benefits. I don't know why we're not doing it.
Would you say that schools being in England, as they have been until this week, but on holiday in Scotland, that schools have been the main vector of transmission, or a main vector of transmission of this virus?
Well, without a doubt, and if we look at what we call heat maps, it starts off with the younger age people, younger age groups, and then it goes on to their parents, and then it goes on to their grandparents. This is well-known, accepted science, and the schools are a big mixing bowl. We know that the children who get infected may not have severe disease, but some of them will unfortunately go on to have long COVID, and we don't know what that means and how long it lasts if it is permanent. The other thing is, if you immunize in that age group, it stops transmissions into older age groups, and you have a protective shield. Furthermore, once you've got a fully immunized schools setting, you can have business continuity as normal in the schools setting. So that would be another bonus of immunizing age 12 and above, as the United States, Canada, Israel, France, Netherlands are all doing.
Is there a particular danger in the Prime Minister's Freedom Day experiment, as if you allow a total loosening of restrictions in a partially vaccinated population, that this might actually encourage variants which are escaping round the current vaccines? You might be assisting the development of a super virus which can defeat our current vaccines.
At the moment, the places where there is uncontrolled infections in a large number is Africa, Asia, South America. So really, we need to suppress infections in the United Kingdom without a doubt, and we need to suppress infections internationally too. Otherwise, the variants that you described will emerge.
Finally, Dr Bharat Pankhania, if you had a message for the Prime Minister Johnson, after the Freedom Day hullabaloo of this week, what would it be?
Please, can you reintroduce the mandatory wearing of masks in these crowded places? And what about immunizing children aged 12 and above? This is a very important thing to do. Why are you not addressing it?
Dr Bharat Pankhania of Exeter University, thank you once again for joining me on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you.
According to Chris Christopherson, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. Well, Boris Johnson has staked everything on the link between coronavirus and pressure on the National Health Service having been broken by the high UK vaccination rate. Thus, the UK government's concept of Freedom Day withdrawing most COVID restrictions in England on Monday of this week. However, the risks are evident. The UK is currently undergoing a third wave surge of coronavirus based around the highly infectious Delta variant. Opening up the economy into the teeth of a COVID surge represents an experiment without precedent. The link between the virus and hospitalisation has been weakened, but not broken entirely, and these are now on the rise. In addition, the long-term impact of the debilitating effects of the virus, sometimes called long COVID, are not well understood. If the infection rate surges past 100,000 cases a day, the full damage to the health of the population will not just be measured in immediate hospitalisation. Finally, Professor Baker points to the risk that the UK opening up with a partially vaccinated population may facilitate the emergence of further vaccine-resistant variants of the virus, meaning that the consequences of Johnson's experiment may have global reach. All in all, the risks of Freedom Day seem more apparent than any supposed advantage. But for now, from Alex, myself, and all at the show, it's goodbye, stay safe, and we'll see you all again next week.